Welcome to The Explainer. Settle in, folks, because today we are looking at an aviation tragedy that completely defies simple explanations. The story of Air India Flight 171 is honestly one of the most perplexing and sobering puzzles in modern aviation history. It's a mystery where the official preliminary data and the strict laws of physics just seem to be at war with one another. We're going to break down exactly what happened using a rigorous 3D reconstruction, and we'll look at the undeniable facts left behind in the wreckage.
Why did you turn it off? I didn't do it. Just let those words sink in for a second. This brief, chilling exchange was actually recorded right there in the cockpit during the critical moments of the flight. It instantly hooks us into the absolute high stakes of this central puzzle. We've got two highly experienced pilots, a state-of-the-art aircraft, and a sudden catastrophic loss of power. What on earth could possibly prompt a question like that just seconds after takeoff?
All right, to really grasp this, we've got to start right on the tarmac. The date is June 12, 2025. It's a blisteringly hot day in Ahmedabad, sitting at 36 degrees Celsius. Now, as you might know, hot air is thin air, and for a massive Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying 242 souls and 54,000 kilos of fuel, thin air means you absolutely need maximum runway performance to generate lift. It's a heavy, heavy aircraft, demanding a whole lot of speed to safely get off the ground. And this timeline right here, it shows just how terrifyingly fast this whole thing went down. At 1:37 p.m., they're cleared for takeoff. Literally a minute later, at 1:38 p.m., the engines are suddenly cut off. And by 1:39 p.m., it's over. Final impact. The highly experienced crew, we're talking a captain with over 15,000 hours and a first officer with aviation in his blood, had incredibly little time to react to a completely impossible situation. 2.5 seconds. That is literally all it took for the actual crash sequence. After scraping a patch of trees and snapping a chimney, the right side of the plane struck a building, which completely tore away the tail. Then the wings clipped subsequent buildings before the final instantaneous explosion. But if we look closely at the data from those final moments, the aircraft had an 8-degree nose-up attitude. So the crucial takeaway here is that the pilots were pulling back on the control column until the very last fraction of a second. They fought desperately to clear those buildings.
So that brings us to Section 1, the data discrepancy.
We know how it crashed, but why did it crash? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at a glaring flaw that pops up when we compare the official preliminary report against a frame-by-frame 3D reconstruction, one that was mapped out using stabilized CCTV footage. Now, what's really interesting here is the impossible physics presented by the official timeline. The preliminary report claims the plane hit a max speed of 180 knots and then the engines cut off. But the physical reconstruction of the plane's actual movement shows that after the time of the engine cutoff, the plane continued to accelerate for 5 whole seconds. It reached 196 knots and climbed to 230 feet. Think about how a jet engine actually works, right? Jet thrust collapses almost instantly the exact moment you cut the fuel. Any high-pressure gases flush out in under a single second. It is physically impossible for a massive commercial airliner to continue accelerating and climbing for 5 full seconds with dead engines. This is a massive, totally unresolved mystery in the data that the current official report simply doesn't explain.
Moving right along to Section 2, 4 theories of failure.
So, putting that weird momentum anomaly aside for just a minute, we still have to answer the biggest question of all. Why do the engine fuel switches move to the cutoff position in the first place? There are exactly 4 theories for why these engines shut down. Theory 1, an intentional manual cutoff. Theory 2, an accidental bump. Theory 3, the plane's own software tripped them. Or Theory 4, the switches never moved at all and it was just a mechanical engine failure. Put on your investigator hats with me here and let's tackle these suspects one by one to see what the data actually supports. All right, let's start with theory number 4, that the switches never moved at all and the engines just flamed out. Well, I can tell you right off the bat, this is categorically false. Think of it kind of like your car ignition. If you run out of gas, your car's computer logs an engine failure, sure, but it doesn't log that the key was turned off. If you actually turn the key, it logs both. And that brings us to how the Boeing 787 is actually wired. It uses something called a remote data concentrator. This is a dedicated physical wire that does exactly one thing. Every single second, it mechanically checks the true physical position of that cockpit switch. The black box recorded that the switches moved to the cutoff position. Because of this direct mechanical wiring, there is zero doubt. Those switches in the cockpit were physically moved. Okay,
Let's move to the next theory and see how this builds. Could the plane's automated software have basically gone rogue and moved the switches without the pilots doing anything? Again, the hard evidence says false. People usually point the finger at a software feature called TCMA, or Thrust Control Malfunction Accommodation. Now, it's a real safety feature, designed to automatically cut fuel if the engine power exceeds safe limits. But here is the critical detail you gotta know. TCMA works by closing a high-pressure valve deep inside the actual engine. It does not possess any wiring or mechanical ability whatsoever to physically move those switches all the way up in the cockpit. And here is the absolute crushing blow to that whole software theory. When TCMA activates and shuts an engine down, it locks. It absolutely cannot be reversed by the pilots in flight. It requires a maintenance crew on the ground to reset the whole system. But the flight data recorder shows that just seconds after the engines shut down on Flight 171, the pilots successfully switched them back to the run position. Therefore, TCMA simply could not have been the culprit. Right, so if the software didn't do it, and the switches definitely moved, could it have been just a horribly unlucky, clumsy mistake? Did someone just accidentally bump them? Well, when you look at the strict physical design of the Boeing 787 center console, you realize this is also exceptionally false. Boeing specifically designed these switches so you literally cannot just bump them. They have 3 heavy mechanical safeguards. First, they're spring-loaded, meaning you have to pinch and physically lift them against heavy pressure. Second, there are thick, raised physical guards surrounding them so a stray hand can't just sweep over them. And third, there are physical mechanical stops at the base. You basically have to fight the switch to turn it off. And yet, despite all of that, the data shows that both of these heavily guarded, spring-loaded switches were turned to the cutoff position within exactly 1 single second of each other. Bumping one by some freak accident is improbable enough. Accidentally bypassing all mechanical safeguards on both switches simultaneously in a 1-second window, that is simply impossible. Which brings us to the end of our process of elimination, leaving us staring at a very cold, chilling reality. Theory 1. A deliberate, intentional, physical manual action by someone inside that cockpit. Someone pinched, lifted, and pulled those 2 switches into the cutoff position right as that massive plane was lifting into the air. Let's head into our final section, the unanswered questions. So we've eliminated the impossible, sure, but what remains leaves us with even more unsettling mysteries found inside the wreckage. Let's look at the immediate aftermath and the questions that still demand answers. The media made a whole lot of noise about the fact that the plane's landing gear was still down when it crashed, but the answer to this one is actually just found in standard aviation procedure. The engines failed when the plane was just 55 feet off the ground. At that low height with dead engines, the pilot monitoring never observed what's called a positive rate of climb. And without a positive rate of climb, the mandatory call to pull the gear up is never made. But guys, here is where things get genuinely bizarre. The aircraft was equipped with an ELT, an emergency locator transmitter. This is a rugged piece of hardware explicitly designed to trigger upon impact and beam radio signals to rescue teams. It is built like a tank to survive catastrophic impact. But the official preliminary report? It casually drops a single line noting that the ELT never activated. No explanation. Furthermore, the rear black box, which is mounted right next to the ELT in the tail, was completely destroyed by thermal damage. It was so badly ruined that the data was entirely unrecoverable. In fact, to even read the surviving front black box, the investigative bureau completely lacked the standard equipment and literally had to import a specialized chassis from the United States just to extract the data. Which leaves us with this final, massive, echoing puzzle. This was a low-speed, low-altitude impact, so why did heavily armored, specialized equipment, whose literal only purpose for existing is to survive a plane crash, completely fail? As we await the final investigative report, we really have to ask ourselves, what deeper truths are still buried in the wreckage of Air India 171? Think about that for a while. And until next time, thanks for joining this explainer and keep questioning the narrative.